Tonight we have Grant Lavac, who's a Melbourne resident, who's been a UFO activist for a few years now and a researcher. And he's here tonight to talk to us about a number of the key documents that he's secured for release through the Freedom of Information Act that reaffirms the current Great Divide and highlights Australia's complete failure to acknowledge and address the potential of national security threats and the safety of flight risks that UAP pose. And Grant, I have to say, I'm sorry, but I still use the old term UFO.
Yeah, why not?
Because I say UAP to people who aren't UFO people, and they
And
go,
they're like, what?
"What is that?"
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us, and I'm really looking forward to what you've got to say. But I'd like to hear first how you got involved in the UFO subject, because hearing people's stories is always very interesting. So yeah, take off.
Yeah, well, look, and again, thank you, Cheryl, for inviting me to have a chat with you all. It's great to be with you and looking forward to sharing with you what insights and perspectives I've been able to glean on this topic in an Australian context over the last couple of years. So I'm born and raised in Sydney. Wife and I moved down here almost a decade ago now to Melbourne because the housing market was just beyond us in Sydney. And so being a Sydney boy growing up, when I was a young fella, 7, 8 years of age in the mid 80s, my father took me to a UFO photo exhibition that was actually on display at Sydney's Centrepoint Tower, Sydney's tallest skyscraper. And I had no idea, that was really my induction or introduction to UFOs, because I really hadn't been exposed to it up until that point. And it was a really wonderful exhibition. All these, famous black and white photos from the 50s kind of blown up on display around this exhibition, center in Sydney Centrepoint Tower. And one of the photos that really caught my eye was the famous McMinnville photo from the 1950s. And I just stared at that photo, which felt like a good 10, 15 minutes, just immersing myself in what that farmer or rancher would have been experiencing, the fascination and the fright when capturing that photo. And that really triggered my curiosity and interest at a very young age. And then obviously growing up as a child of the 90s in high school, every Wednesday night come 9 p.m. without fail, you'd watch the X-Files, and then you'd do a big debrief with your schoolmates the next day and you'd talk about it. And then into my adult years, I went to university, studied health science was my passion back then. And I kind of, my interest in the topic kind of ebbed and flowed in my young adult years. But then it really wasn't until, and I imagine like so many other people, that when the bombshell articles came out in 2017, December 2017, with the New York Times articles, that really reinvigorated my interest. And then obviously going into COVID, so many of us were spending so much more time at home, and us poor souls in Melbourne, we were locked in our homes almost longer than almost anyone else on the planet. So I had a lot more time on my hands, and during COVID, I just kind of became a big sponge again on the topic, trying to learn as much as I could from as many as I could, because so much had been happening since 2017, and there was an online 3-day, all-day, 3-day activism event that was being run by a popular YouTuber out of the States, and it was having subject matter experts and guest speakers come on and present and talk during the 3-day live stream event. And the whole focus of this live stream event was to encourage everyday folks like you and I, but more so those in the States, to activate themselves and engage their elected representatives on the UFO, the UAP topic, and advocate for their elected representative to take the topic seriously and ask questions within government. And that really got me thinking, well, all of these folks taking a serious interest in the UFO UAP topic in the States and engaging the elected representatives. Well, what's happening down under? What's happening in Australia? And that kind of was the start of my journey into try and better understand the Australian government and the Australian Department of Defence's current engagement, or really lack thereof, engagement on the UFO topic. And so since really, for the last 3 years now, I've been engaging not just government and Department of Defense, but my elected representatives as well, and been fortunate enough to develop a relationship with Senator Peter Wilson, who's the only Australian senator to date that's taken this topic seriously and asked questions within Parliament. And I've been exercising my right to information, leveraging the Freedom of Information Act to secure documents for release that kind of give hints and leave breadcrumbs as to what the Australian Department of Defence and Royal Australian Air Force's mindset really is when it comes to the UFO topic. And it's quite interesting how it has evolved in a relatively short period of time, since I've taken an interest in the topic. So that kind of gives you a sense as to where I've come from, where I'm at. My family, I've got a bit of a personal connection to the topic as well. My uncle, my late uncle on my mother's side, he was the project manager for the top secret RESAT project that was out of Woomera in South Australia in the 60s. The first satellite that was launched into orbit. He was largely responsible for heading up that program. And those of you that know your UFO lore in Australia, Woomera was the location of a lot of sightings of anomalous objects and UFOs in the 60s. And even earlier, and even into the 70s. And my uncle on my father's side, my late uncle on my father's side, he was an author, and he authored a work of fiction called Majestic 12 about the famed or controversial Majestic 12 documents. And unfortunately, he passed both of them passed actually before I had an opportunity to really pick their brains on the research that they had done. Both at a real top secret project level at Woomera, and then obviously my uncle on my dad's side with his work of fiction. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a backstory about me, and I've just been fortunate enough throughout my travels to develop a really wonderful and interesting network of colleagues and folks that I respect and trust. I'm really standing on the shoulders of giants like veteran researchers like Keith Basterfield, Bill Chalker, Ross Coulthard. These are the guys that I really admire and respect for the research and due diligence that they've done. And I'm fortunate enough that I've been able to develop a working relationship with them on this topic. So hopefully that's a long-winded answer, but hopefully it gives you kind of a bit of a snapshot.
I'm really interested to know how difficult it is to navigate your way through the Freedom of Information Act process, those FOIA requests. How did you find that when you first
to the uninitiated, it is a pretty daunting process. If you've never submitted a Freedom of Information Act request before, it can be a pretty intimidating process. And there's a gentleman in the United States, a good friend of mine, John Greenwald Jr., who's been filing FOIA requests in the United States for several decades, ever since he's about my age. I'm 45 years of age, and he's been filing FOIA requests in the US since he was since he was a teenager. So I've just been very fortunate that I've been able to learn from John Greenwald Jr. directly, not just on a private level, but just reading a lot of the FOIA requests that he's been submitting and seeing what success that he's had, and learning from his successes as well as his failures. And I'm certainly no expert when it comes to FOIA. I certainly consider myself a student of FOIA. I mean, I learn something every day when I submit a FOIA request or I get a statement of reasons back, a response back. But once you've submitted a couple of FOIA requests and you have success, and again, it's your right to, as an Australian taxpayer and citizen, you can exercise your right to information and file a FOIA request to most government agencies in Australia. And in many cases, it won't cost you anything to secure release of documents if it's not a comprehensive or extensive request. So I've just learnt through trial and error, through my failures to date, some of the successes that I've had, and been fortunate to learn from others like John Greenwald Jr., who's been doing this for a very, very long time. But anyone can do it, and I'm always humbled and appreciative when people reach out to me, and they often ask me, can I get your thoughts on this request that I want to submit, and they might ask for some suggestions or guidance. So I'm always happy to assist anyone that's keen to lodge a request.
I know when Keith Basterfield and his team were doing the Disclosure Australia project, I think that was in 2003. They started it then anyway. Excuse me. That they found that they had to ask. They didn't ask specifically what they discovered that when they asked specifically for UFO or flying saucer or something like that, that didn't get them the information that they wanted. And they were very lucky to have people who are working in that office to help them navigate those requests by finding the right terminology. So what is that? How did you find that?
Yeah, so with what I've discovered through FOIA, and I'm sure Keith would agree that it's kind of like finding the Goldilocks zone. You don't want to be too general, and you don't want to be overly specific with your request, because if you're too general, if your request is too broad, you might get a refusal response back from the FOIA office saying, look, the potential administrative burden that this will place on the FOIA team, processing such a big request, they just won't touch it. Whereas if you're too specific, you might miss the mark altogether if you're using a specific term or keyword for searching that is not one that they have used internally. So there have been a lot of, so usually when I submit a FOIA request, I don't just I don't just put in one term or one keyword as part of the search. I'll often put in a number of keywords that we use interchangeably: UFO, UAP, UAS, unusual aerial sightings, is the vernacular that defense used in decades past. Unidentified. So you might use a slew of different keywords that might end up. You might be successful getting a successful response on. So it's a bit of a sometimes like throwing a dart at the dartboard and seeing if you get close to the bullseye. But it is a challenge because the terminology has changed over the years, and what terminology might be successful in the United States is not necessarily successful in Australia. So.
Yeah. Take us through some of the things. What are the things that you started to ask for, to request in the early days, right? And then how did that evolve and progress to where you're at today? And what have you discovered?
Yeah, so FOIA is, it's not the be all end all. It can certainly be a valuable tool in any researcher's toolkit just to get breadcrumbs of information from government or whoever it is that you're filing a request. And I've predominantly been filing my request to the Royal Australian Air Force, the Australian Department of Defence, Defence Science and Technology Group. That's really been my focus, predominantly RAF, because the Royal Australian Air Force has quite a long history. And what not a lot of people know, that Australia has almost as long as a history as the United States investigating this topic. Dating back to the early 50s, in the years after Roswell, all the way through to really the mid 1990s, where in 1996 the Royal Australian Air Force kind of washed its hands and said, move along, folks, nothing to see here. And they ceased all investigations into UFO, or what they referred to as UAS, because they could not find, quote, any compelling or other scientific reason to continue to devote resources to the investigation of the topic. So what I can do, if it's helpful, is just start telling you a bit of a story as to what I've been able to find through documents through the Freedom of Information Act, as well as engaging the Australian Department of Defence, what Senator Whish-Wilson has been, the questions that he has been asking to date in Parliament, in Senate estimates, and that can kind of paint a picture for you as to what Australia has been doing and really hasn't been doing on this topic for the last 4 years.
Sounds great. Go ahead.
All right, so let's use that as a starting point. So like I said, the Royal Australian Air Force really made a decision in 1996 to cease its investigation into the UFO topic, or again, what it referred to, the vernacular that it used was unusual aerial sightings, UAS. And so in the lead up to 1996, there was a document that was secured for release through the Freedom of Information Act. So essentially, this document, this was a brief for the CAS, the Chief of Air Staff, which nowadays is called the Chief of Air Force. And this was an unusual aerial sightings policy document that was authored by a gentleman by the name of Brett Biddington, who is in Air Force Intelligence. And basically, he submitted this brief to the Chief of Air Staff, the then Chief of Air Force. This was in 1993, basically, giving a state of play of, what the Royal Australian Air Force had been doing to date up until that point in terms of its investigations on the UAS topic, the UFO topic. And in this document, there was a policy recommendation. And the recommendation that was made to the Chief of Air Staff was that whilst not all UFO, UAS have a ready explanation, there is no compelling reason for the RAF to continue to devote resources to the recording, investigating, and attempting to explain UAS. So basically, this policy recommendation, which was submitted in, authored by Brett Biddington in October of 1993, that was formally adopted in 1996. And so in 1996, that's when the Royal Australian Air Force completely stopped investigating the UFO topic. And basically the current guidance of the Royal Australian Air Force and the Australian Department of Defence to the general public and the military is, if you have an observation, if you have a sighting of a UFO, UAP, call the cops, basically, or reach out to your preferred civilian UFO organization for follow-up or investigation. So fast forward to the 25th of June of 2021, and in the United States, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence put out its preliminary assessment on UAP. And so this was a congressionally mandated report that the ODNI released, basically stating the challenges that members of the armed services in the United States, the ongoing incursions that they were encountering with UFOs, UAP, these training exercises that had to be cancelled due to UAP, UFOs operating with impunity in restricted airspace. And so essentially this document, which is publicly available, I'll just highlighted some of the key executive summary points for you. So their analysis in June of 2021 was that if and when UAP observations and incidents are resolved, they'll likely fall into one of 5 potential explanatory categories: airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, US government or US industry developmental programs, so their own technology, foreign adversarial systems, and this interesting catch-all other bin, which could potentially be something that is completely exotic and not potentially Earth-based. They didn't say non-human intelligence or extraterrestrial. They just used this catch-all other bin. And so this report was really an analysis of 144 reports of UFOs, UAP observations recorded on US government sensors and assets. So they're all from US government sources. And out of those 144 cases that they had investigated for this preliminary assessment, they could only confidently identify or resolve one of them. So 143 of 144 observations of UAP were unresolved. And so that was the starting point for really Congress in the United States to push for greater investigation into this topic so they can better understand the nature and extent of UAP, these incursions in restricted airspace and so on. And some of the challenges that they identified in this report was that narratives from aviators in the operational community and analysts from the military and the intelligence community describe disparagement associated with observing UAP, reporting it or attempting to discuss it with colleagues. Although the effects of these stigmas lessened as senior members of the scientific, policy, military, and intelligence communities engage on the topic seriously in public, reputational risk may keep many observers silent, complicating scientific pursuit of the topic. So the walls of stigma that have long plagued the UFO topic for really more than 75 years, aviators and folks in the military in the US dared not report observations of UAP out of fear of reprisal, stigma, being ostracized, and the US Department of Defense identified that as a real problem, as a national security threat in itself, that if it's, members of the armed services weren't reporting observations of UAP, which could be potentially foreign adversarial systems, that was a real concern. So this is what happened in June of 2021. Fast forward to only a couple months later, where Australian Green Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, in a Senate estimates hearing on the 27th of October 2021, and if you're not familiar with what a Senate estimates is, it's basically kind of like a budget oversight or budget estimates hearing where Australian senators get to ask questions of those in positions of leadership and authority in defence and other government departments to really scrutinise taxpayer spending and ensure that the Australian taxpayers' dollars are being well spent, invested, they're not being wasted, that the Australian public is getting a return basically on its investment through various programs. So Senator Peter Whish-Wilson caught wind of this preliminary assessment on UAP that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence had put out, and he decided to ask the then Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Mel Hupfield, questions about UAP UFOs in an Australian context. So let me play for you. I won't play the entire exchange because it goes for about 8 minutes, but I'll just play for you a couple of minutes from the start of that exchange. And this is all covered under fair use and fair dealing, so there's nothing, we're permitted to show this, obviously. So let me show this on screen for you. So this is Senator Peter Whish-Wilson questioning the then Chief of Air Force, Mel Hupfield, on UAP in Australian context at a Senate estimates hearing on the 27th of October 2021.
Air Marshal Mel Hupfield, Chief of Air Force. I am a pilot and I used to fly aeroplanes, not current now, but I think I've got the information you might need depending on your question.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, great. My question relates to the, I know we have close ties with the US, we share intelligence. My questions relate to release of the report on the 25th of June 2021 by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Preliminary Assessments, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. This is an issue that has been raised in Congress. The Department of Defence has submitted a report. It's become a significant matter of public interest. And I suppose my first question is, are you aware of that report, Chief of Air Force?
I'm not formally aware of the report, but if I'm thinking there was an article in the newspapers, a commentary about that at some stage, but I'm not quite sure of the content of the report.
Okay. Just as a matter of interest, what questions did you think I was going to ask?
I thought you were going to ask some questions about aircraft, but it sounds like you're going to ask questions about UFOs.
Well, we'd be very interesting to hear your views on this. Look, yes, it has been reported in the media extensively.
So there you can see you can see through, just with that exchange, how uncomfortable Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Mel Hupfield was. He was essentially caught completely off guard with that line of questioning from Senator Wish Wilson. He was not prepared for the senator's line of questioning, and basically throughout the rest of the exchange, the senator asked, well, does Australia have any current reporting or recording protocols on UFO UAP? It doesn't. Had the Chief of Air Force seen the 3 famous videos that had been put out a number of years prior, the Tic Tac video, FLIR 1, Go Fast and Gimbal? He had seen them. He found them interesting, but not necessarily compelling. So really, basically, just putting cold water over the UFO UAP topic and saying, look, this is not an issue for Australia. It's an issue for the United States. So following that hearing on the 27th of October of 2021, I started submitting some Freedom of Information Act requests, and I was able to secure for release a document from the Australian Department of Defence, and some have said to me that it's really the most significant document on the UFO topic to come out of the Australian Department of Defence in close to 25, 30 years, because it really paints a picture for you as to what the current mindset is of the Royal Australian Air Force and the Australian Department of Defence. So because Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Mel Hupfield was caught completely off guard with the Senator's questions, people in his staff in the Royal Australian Air Force, those in positions of senior positions in RAF, prepared a formal briefing document, a Chief of Air Force brief on UAP, so that when the next Senate estimates hearing came around, which was, I believe, in sometime in 2022, there was, basically, if Air Marshal Mel Hupfield was asked questions again on UFOs, he would have some script to follow, some talking points that he could just recite that would kind of quickly and easily shut down any questions that the Senator was asking. So this is a significant document because one of the items in the table of contents is strategic narrative. What's strategic narrative? That's essentially the story that the Royal Australian Air Force wants to tell to sell its story to the Australian public and senators and to the media and so on the topic of unidentified aerial phenomena, which is now since transitioned into unidentified anomalous phenomena because it takes into account all domains, space, air, and sea. So one of the strategic narratives, if we come on down to that section, what I found to be very interesting is that mysteriously, magically, the Royal Australian Air Force, without having investigated the topic since 1996, without having engaged or been engaged by the United States Department of Defence on the UAP topic at this point in time, and without the Royal Australian Air Force or Australian Department of Defence being exposed to any of the classified information that resided within the classified reports that were provided to US Congress, the Royal Australian Air Force and Australian Department of Defence were magically able to make a determination as to what UAP UFOs are likely to be, or even not likely to be. Their determination, again, without having looked at the topic since 1996, is that UAP are likely to be one of 3 things: natural or other benign phenomena, anomalies with sensors, human-made technology, so consistent with some of the potential 5 explanatory options that the ODNI stated its preliminary assessment, but no reference whatsoever to this catch-all other bin of possible other things that it could be. That could be a myriad of things that weren't even expounded on in ODNI's report. And it also said UAP could be other nations' systems, either contemporary or advanced. So I just found that intriguing that RAF was able to make that determination on what UAP are likely to be or not likely to be without having investigated the topic since 96 and haven't investigated it up until that point and been privy to any of the classified information that was shared within US Congress. It also went on in this document to provide some scripted responses on talking points. So if the Chief of Air Force was asked a question at a future Senate estimates by, say, a Senator Wilson, well, might one of those questions be, as an ally, have the United States offered to or asked to collaborate on UAP investigations? The script that the Chief of Air Force was to follow was no, the United States nor any other nation or ally have requested or offered to collaborate on UAP reporting or investigation. Furthermore, Defence, being the Australian Department of Defence, has no desire to seek collaboration on this issue. So again, washing its hands, move along, folks, nothing to see here. We're not interested in discussing the UAP UFO topic. So very, very interesting document, and it goes on with some other talking points. It even goes so far as saying there is no evidence to suggest that UAP would be extraterrestrial in origin, even though the word extraterrestrial is not once used in ODNI's preliminary assessment. The Royal Australian Air Force felt it was necessary to include that as a talking point in its briefing paper for the Chief of Air Force. So just a really interesting document that was released in 26th of May of 2022. Again, preparing the Chief of Air Force for possible future questions that he may get at Senate estimates. So fast forward the clock a little further to the next Senate estimates hearing later that year, which was on the 9th of November of 2022. Senator Wilson once again pressed the then Chief of Air Force. At that time, it was Air Marshal Robert Chipman, who's since moved out of the role. It's now Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Stephen Chappell. But Senator Wilson pressed the then Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Robert Chipman on UAP, again, continuing his line of questioning that he started in October of 2021. And this is a brief video clip of that exchange for you. So let me play this one for you.
The safety of flight and potential threats to security of our operations. You've obviously got strategies in place to do that here. Are you aware of reports? I did raise this with the previous Air Marshal as well, of US military exercises being cancelled because of concerns around air safety and observations of UAPs.
Is this a UFO question?
You could call them a UFO if you like, Senator Wong.
Really?
They're now technically
so just so I'm clear,
unidentified aerial phenomena. What do you think? Do you think it's funny?
I haven't been here for. Well, I don't think I've asked questions about this.
Okay. Well,
I'm not sure we
can.
Can we assist at all?
So there you have it. The complete ignorance is bliss card. So that was from the Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong, just completely interjecting during Senator Wilson's line of questioning of Air Marshal Robert Chipman. Almost playing the card. Why are we even being asked these questions? This line of questioning is beyond the Senate. The Senate. Why are we even entertaining these questions? And obviously, look where we are today, and you can see how very wrong Penny Wong was with her lines of questioning. So completely ignorant on the seriousness, the serious nature that our Five Eyes, our US ally Five Eyes partner across the pond in the United States, is taking this topic seriously from a national security threat and safety of flight risk. So that was in November of 2022. It kind of gives you a sense as to, ridicule and stigma is unfortunately still alive and well within the Australian government and even the Australian Department of Defence, because I was able to, one of the documents that I was able to secure for release through the Freedom of Information Act, if I pull this up on screen for you, this was an email chain between a member of the Australian Defence Space Command and someone in a relatively high position within the Royal Australian Air Force. Basically, there was an article that was published in an online magazine that called out AUKUS, which is the trilateral alliance between Australia, the UK, and the US, on, we're about to invest $500 billion on the acquisition of these 3 Virginia-class nuclear-attack submarines. And, there were obviously some jokes being pushed back and forth in this email chain, and it goes so far in this email on the 13th of May 2022, earlier in that year. All jokes aside, I think this might end up causing us some work, referring to the UAP topic as it pertains to the AUKUS alliance. The response that came back to that email was, you're right, it may trigger more UFO flavored interest. The truth is out there. I'll just need to determine if interest in this sci-fi, science fiction, is an HAC, Head of Air Force Capability, or Defense Space Commander lead. So again, it just shows you how the derision and ridicule that those in positions of leadership within the Australian Department of Defence and the Australian government are treating this topic. And we're so past that point, just like when Sunrise plays the bloody X-Files theme whenever they cover the UFO topic. We're well and truly past that point. But unfortunately, the walls of stigma are still very much up in the Australian government and within the halls of the Australian Department of Defence. So let's now fast forward the clock even further to the following year, the 15th of February, 2023. So what do we remember happened in February 2023? Well, we had the whole debacle with the Chinese spy balloon and those 3 still unidentified aerial objects that were picked up on radar through NORAD in the continental United States, and they were shot down by the United States Air Force. First time NORAD had put out an order for a shoot down over continental United States airspace. So I think it was the day after that all went down. Obviously the Chinese spy balloon was a week or so prior to the 15th of February. But on the 15th of February, Senator Wish Wilson again took that as an opportunity to press again Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Robert Chipman on those 3 identified aerial objects, and again asking questions about the UFO UAP topic. So let me show you that exchange, just a brief short exchange for you. There we go.
The task force or the Pentagon in relation to this issue in recent months?
No, sir.
Sorry, let me start that again. I'll just come back to the start. There we go.
Have you had any briefings from the UAP task force or the Pentagon in relation to this issue in recent months?
No, Senator.
Has any defence attaches had any?
Senator, we were briefed on the recent incidents that were related to the shoot down of what has been attributed to China's balloon that was over the United States of America. We don't know if we were one of the 40 nations that were referred to in the press briefing, but we have been briefed by the US, and we have sought additional information from them through the the air attaché in Washington.
So specifically in relation to the Chinese surveillance balloon or spy balloon or whatever you want to call it, what about the three other?
We've sought information in relation to those 4 incidents, yes, Senator.
Okay, and why have you sought information in relation to those?
Because we would like to know what the source of the unidentified object is. We would like to know what the identity of it is, and we would like to know how the US has responded to it, so that if we had something similar in our airspace, then we can take advantage of the learning from that.
So they had reached out to the United States Department of Defense via the air attaché in Washington, D.C. for a briefing, information on those shoot-down events, because they wanted to know the source, the identity, and what learnings could be gained from the US response to those shoot-down events. That's where the hypocrisy really gets me from the Australian Department of Defence. The United States Department of Defence and what even President Biden iterated on the podium to the world is that the Chinese spy balloon and those 3 unidentified aerial objects were shot down because they posed a national security threat to the United States and a safety of flight risk. The exact same safety of flight risk and national security threat that UFOs, UAP pose. Yet at that point in time, Robert Chipman just said in that statement that he had not sought a briefing from the United States Department of Defense. The air attaché had no briefing on UFO up until that date. Why? The United States Department of Defense and even the US Congress have stated time and time again over the last number of years that UFOs, UAP, are a national security threat, a safety of flight risk, and they're a global issue. The United States Space Force went even so far to say in a public statement that UFOs, UAP are a global issue. They're not isolated to the United States. So just the hypocrisy there from the Chief of Air Force, I find laughable, that they'll happily seek an information and briefing on the Chinese spy balloon and those 3 unidentified aerial objects, but they won't bother to touch the UFO and UAP topic. And there is a number of reasons why I think they don't want to touch it, because they will then have to potentially admit that, they've said, move along, folks, nothing to see here back in 1996. And now if they're brought back into the game and then they have to admit that we still don't know what's in our skies, and there's a domain awareness gap, there is a potential perceived lack of public trust that might come from the Australian tax-paying public. So I don't think the Royal Australian Air Force and Department of Defence wanted to admit that UAP, UFOs is something that is worthy of investigation due to the national security threats and safety of flight risks that they pose. So that was a very interesting exchange that happened immediately after the shoot-down events. Now, that was in February. Fast forward a couple of months to the 31st of May of 2023, where the then director of the US All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, called ARO, the Pentagon's current UFO UAP investigatory body, a congressionally mandated office that was stood up to investigate the UAP UFO phenomena and better understand the nature and the extent, and be able to put in mitigating strategies to address the safety, flight risk, and national security threats that UFOs, UAP pose. So this was Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who is now no longer the director. He's retired from public service. There's now a new director that was appointed and announced only just this week, I believe. But this was Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick at NASA's public hearing on UAP. They held a public meeting with the UAP, NASA's UAP independent study team. And Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick was invited to speak and say a few words to NASA's independent study team. So let me play this exchange for you, because it's important as to where we're now going with what happens next. And I'll just move this to the start. Oops.
I think we have time for one last question.
Sean, you recommended foreign partnership with NASA. I'm curious, especially given your map, have you, as ARO, partnered with international agencies, and is there ways for reporting to your?
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question. I want to expound on that just a little bit. So I have just held our first Five Eyes forum on this subject last week, I think it was, or earlier this week. I don't know. Dan was there, and we have, we've entered into discussions with our partners on data sharing. How do they do reporting? What kind of analysis can they help us with? What kind of calibration can they help us with? What can we help them with? And we're establishing all of that right now. And they're going to end up, sending their information and data to us to feed into the process that we've laid out for how we're going to do all of this. Beyond that, I have not had either the time or the bandwidth to do, and that's why I would look to NASA to expand the scientific and academic relationships that they have across all of our allies and partners on how can we bring them into the fold. That's where I think there's a lot of benefit to NASA taking lead on that.
Great. Thank you. But one just clarifications for people who don't know, what are the Five Eyes?
Oh, I'm sorry. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Five Eyes, those are that's the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. So those are the 5 partners.
Terrific. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So there you go. So you have this announcement of a Five Eyes forum on UAP. And, you know, in that document that I showed you earlier, it said defense has no desire to collaborate with allies or partners on the UAP issue. And now you have, you know, the United States, courtesy of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, saying, we want to reach out to our allies to understand what they've done in the past to investigate UAP. We want to bring them into the fold and collaborate as an intelligence alliance to really get to the bottom of this problem. Now, what is very interesting and I find quite humorous is that only, let me just show you this on screen here. That was in May of 2023. Now, less than a year prior to that, in July of 2022, I had reached out to the, I'll just zoom in so it's a bit easier on the eyes there for you. I had sent some inquiries to the current Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Defence, Richard Marles, asking some questions about UFOs, UAP in Australian context. And this is the response letter that I received from the Royal Australian Air Force on behalf of Richard Marles, because they had, the RAF had typically taken lead on the UFO topic historically. And this was almost a year prior to that statement that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick just made. So it says, I've highlighted it for you on screen. It says, the Five Eyes is an intelligence alliance comprising of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, United Kingdom, United States of America. Air Force does not lead on these forums. Air Force does not consider this the appropriate platform to discuss the topic of UAP or UFO. So, boy, how wrong did the Royal Australian Air Force get it? Because only less than a year later, you would have the Pentagon's UFO UAP office saying, we're going to now leverage the Five Eyes Alliance to bring each of these countries into discussions on UAP. So RAF was way off the mark on that front. And so that leads into, that really got me interested hearing that from Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, because it piqued my interest and my ears pricked up, said, wow, you know, the US Department of Defense dedicated office for investigating UFOs and UAP has just had this Five Eyes forum. Did Australia attend this Five Eyes forum? If so, who from Australia attended? So I fired off a slew of inquiries to defense media, to Deputy Prime Minister media team. Other journalists had done it as well. There's a great journalist in the United States, Brandy Vincent, who does some reporting for Defence Scoop. She reached out to the Australian Department of Defence, and there were others as well. I received a response to my inquiries basically saying, giving me a definitive response that, well, Air Force did not attend the Five Eyes forum on UAP, and this was on the 30th of June. So really, what's that? A month after it was announced by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, Air Force, I would hope, had done their due diligence and asked around internally and said, hey guys, did anyone on our side attend this Five Eyes forum on UAP? No? Okay, let's confirm that back. So they did. So I'm like, all right, well, Air Force didn't attend. So who may have attended from other defence services, or other agencies within the Australian Department of Defence? And so I wasn't going to get a response. All of the inquiries that I had submitted to the Defence media team, to the Deputy Prime Minister media team, and even Brandy Vincent for Defence Scoop, weren't getting any responses, weren't getting any information pertaining to Australia's attendance at this Five Eyes forum on UAP. So based on the relationship that I had established at that point with Senator Wish Wilson, who had been, again, the only Australian senator to that point, and sadly to date, that's asked questions about UAP, UFOs in an Australian context, he submitted a number of questions to the Australian Department of Defence, what are called questions on notice. In each of the occasions that Senator Wish Wilson appeared at the Senate estimates to ask questions, he was only allocated around about 8 minutes of time to ask questions, because he's a participating member of the Senate estimates for Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade. He's not a permanent member, so he has to kind of wait around all day until the Greens give him 8 minutes to ask some questions. So it was a better use of his time to submit some questions on notice. And so he did exactly that. And so on the 19th of June, a couple of days before I got that response letter back that I just showed you on screen, Senator Whish-Wilson asked a number of questions, and hopefully that's displaying okay on screen. And the question was, did Australia, I've highlighted there, did Australia attend the recent Five Eyes meeting held in May 2023, which is what Sean Kirkpatrick said at that NASA public meeting? If so, did it, being Australia, attend the US briefings on UAPs? And the response that came back from the Australian Department of Defence about a month later, the response that they gave on the 20th of July, I believe, was a one sentence: Australia did not attend a United States briefing on UAPs. Now, for me, that was a WTF moment. I'm thinking, well, why on earth would Australia not accept an invitation from its US ally and Five Eyes and AUKUS partner that has been congressionally mandated, RO, to coordinate with allies and international partners of the United States to better understand the nature and extent of UAP? Why would we turn down a request for a formal briefing from our US ally when clearly UAP is keeping them and the DOD and members of Congress and the IC up at night because of the national security threats and safety of flight risk that UAP pose? It made no sense to me that Australia would not attend a briefing on UAP given the opportunity, given receiving an invitation, even though they indicated that they had no desire to collaborate on the topic. Again, Australia and the United States are the closest of allies, yet their positions on UAP could not be further apart. And we pretty much are in lockstep with the United States on every defense initiative except UAP and UFOs. And I wanted to better understand why that was the case. And that information that the Australian Department of Defence provided by way of response to Senator Whish-Wilson's questions on notice, we would take that to be a factual and accurate statement that Australia did not attend a United States briefing on UAPs. So I had the good fortune of developing a connection with a journalist for the Canberra Times. His name was Jamison Murphy. And I was able to provide him with some background information, essentially what I've been discussing with you thus far. And he put an article out for the Canberra Times. It was on the second page of the Canberra Times, which is the leading publication within the ACT. So you bet your bottom dollar that there are members of the Australian Government Department of Defence that would have read this article. The title being, Australia ignores US Five Eyes UAP briefing as Defence Force mocks UFOs. Per that email that I showed you before, that they really think this is a science fiction issue. There's nothing to it. Again, move along, folks. Nothing to see here. So that hit the press, and I think that rattled some cages within the government and the Australian Department of Defence. And so what happened after that point? Well, that was in October of last year that this article came out in the Canberra Times. So I was getting frustrated with the fact that I wasn't gaining any traction from my request to the Defence media team, the Deputy Prime Minister media team. I wasn't having any success trying to secure documents for release through FOIA, like emails. I'd gotten a few here or there, but nothing really all that significant. So in June of last year, I submitted a petition to the House of Representatives requesting that the Australian Department of Defence formally review its long-held position on UFOs, UAP, which is nothing, move along folks, nothing to see here since 1996, formally review its position on UAP and consider implementing an investigatory body which would formally assess the national security threats and safety of flight risks that UFOs and UAP pose. And I was very grateful that that petition, which I'll just show you, I won't read through the entire petition, but I'll just show you. I was very, petition EN 515, I was very, what's the word? I was incredibly touched to know that 758 of my fellow Australians, I was one of those that submitted a signature on this petition. 758 of my fellow Australians supported that petition in our ask for the House and Defence to conduct a formal review of its position on UAP and consider implementing an investigatory body on UAP. So what was the response that came back a couple of months after from the Minister for Defence, Richard Marles? So this was the response that was received, that was issued from the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Defence, Richard Marles, to the chair of the Standing Committee on Petitions. So this was the formal response letter to that petition that I submitted. And I won't read through the whole letter, but I'll just highlight a few bits for you. Basically, the Minister for Defence, Richard Marles, again reiterated Defence's position that Defence ceased handling reports of UAP in 1996 as there was no scientific or compelling reason to continue to divert resources to the recording and investigation of UAP. Defence does maintain a robust safety and security reporting and management frameworks that are sufficiently flexible to capture UAP. I don't believe that to be the case because I have reviewed the Defence Aviation Safety Authority's regulation as it pertains to occurrence reports. And there is nothing that is, in my opinion, sufficient to capture observations of UAP, which could become a safety of flight risk. So again, reiterating the long-held position of Defence that it ceased its investigation, it continues to hold that position, that there are no scientific or other compelling reasons to continue to devote resources to investigation or consider implementing strategies to investigate UAP. Now, again, their position in 1996, we don't live in 1996. We live in 2024. The landscape on UAP and UFOs is very different today than what it was back in 1996. So I was really puzzled and struggling to understand why there was this reticence and reluctance from the Australian Department of Defence to even consider formally reviewing its position on UAP, and why it had not accepted an invitation from our Five Eyes partner, US ally, to share intelligence on UFOs and UAP. The government remains committed to aviation safety and national security. Should there be a compelling reason to believe existing reporting mechanisms are insufficient, the government would reconsider. And I'll show you why I believe there is a compelling reason why existing reporting mechanisms are insufficient. We'll come to that in just a moment. So that was the formal response from the Minister of Defence on the 27th of November of last year. Now, I didn't stop once I received a response from, or I should say, once Senator Whish-Wilson received that response to his questions on notice back in July, which stated categorically and definitively that Australia did not attend the United States briefing on UFOs. I wasn't satisfied with that response, nor was Senator Whish-Wilson. So what did he do? On the 2nd of November, he submitted further questions on notice to the Australian Department of Defence. And I know, his office submitted these because I was fortunate enough to propose a number of questions for Senator Whish-Wilson's consideration. And this question that I've highlighted was the question that I suggested that Senator Whish-Wilson ask in his questions on notice. The question was, knowing that back in July, again, Australian Department of Defence is saying Australia did not attend United States briefing on UAPs, ARA's Five Eyes Forum on UAP, Senator Whish-Wilson asked a follow-up question on the 2nd of November. Did the Australian Department of Defence receive an invitation from the US All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, ARA, to attend the inaugural Five Eyes Forum on UAP in May 2023, led by ARA Director Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick? If yes, so if it did, what reasons did the Australian Department of Defence decide that Australia, as a Five Eyes member, not attend ARA's Five Eyes Forum on UAP? What was the justification for you not accepting that invitation? Who has final decision on attendance? And if there are other Five Eyes engagements that we've refused an invitation to attend previously, how many Five Eyes Forums meetings has Australia not attended in the last 5 years? This was submitted in writing on the 2nd of November. On the 15th of December, a little over a month later, The Australian Department of Defence responds to Senator Whish-Wilson's question with the following. Yes, a defence representative at the Australian Embassy in Washington attended. Again, another WTF moment, a complete 180 backflip on what it had put out as being factual and actual back in July. So how is it possible that they got it so wrong? They stuffed up catastrophically. Was it complete and gross incompetence on the side of the Australian Department of Defence that they could not adequately do their due diligence and ask around to identify if Australia had attended the Five Eyes Forum on UAP? How did they get it so wrong? How did they then do a 180, not thinking that folks like me and Senator Whish-Wilson would be continuing to ask these questions? So when they're kind of caught red-handed, they have to kind of admit their incompetence or maybe some deception. You know, Ross Coulthard's quote is always assume a cover-up before always assume a screw-up before a conspiracy. So could it have just been utter incompetence on behalf of the Australian Department of Defence? If so, well, what degree of confidence do Australian taxpayers have going forward that their elected representatives that are going to ask people in positions of authority and leadership within defence or in government, what confidence do we as taxpayers have that the Australian Department of Defence is going to respond factually and accurately to questions that our elected representatives ask? I have very little confidence that questions that I'm asking of those in positions of leadership in defence, whether it be the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Defence Richard Marles, and others in positions of leadership in RAF and other defence agencies, I've lost all confidence that they're going to accurately respond to inquiries that I've made and even Freedom of Information Act requests. And I suspect that Senator Whish-Wilson has lost a degree of confidence as well. So how could they get it so wrong? How did they get it so badly wrong and stuff that up? And that's a question that I've been asking since the 15th of December of last year, and one that I've never received a satisfactory response to. And so again, this information was reported in the Canberra Times. So the Canberra Times followed up on their article from October of 2023 with this follow-up article on the 11th of February this year. Defence admits attending UFO briefing after vigorous denial. So again, a scathing article by the Canberra Times that really criticises the Australian Department of Defence lack of due diligence on trying to accurately answer Senator Whish-Wilson's question. Again, how did they get it so wrong? Well, I'll tell you the explanation that they provided on how they got it so wrong. A document that I received, this is another document that was released through the Freedom of Information Act. This was a document in February of 2024, only of this year, your talking points in preparation for a Senate estimates. And I'll just come down to the right document because I've highlighted, it's a little easier to see on the screen. So, unidentified aerial phenomena, issues of the day, addressing specifically how they got it so wrong. How did they do a 180 backflip on their initial denial and then admitting that, yes, we did have someone attend. So on the issue of a defence representative from the Australian Embassy in Washington attended a Five Eyes Forum on Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, UAP, in May 2023. If asked, so again, giving a script to the Chief of Air Force, so if he's asked this question, this is how you can respond. If asked, why did Defence's response change regarding attendance at the UAP forum when responding to questions on notice Q&A from Senator Whish-Wilson? Bullet point responses, Defence was unable to find a record of attendance at the UAP forum when responding to a question on notice from Senator Peter Whish-Wilson received on the 20th of June. Defence later found a record of attendance when responding to a question on notice from Senator Whish-Wilson received on 2nd of November. Well, we know that, but how did you get it so wrong? Again, there's this complete lack of transparency from the Australian Department of Defence when it comes to this topic. And that's what's so frustrating, is that you'll never get responses that are at all adequate or satisfactory. They'll tell you, again, strategic narrative. They'll sell you the story that they want to. They want to control the narrative in how they respond to these sorts of questions on notice and queries that they receive from the general public. So we still, as of the 30th of August of 2024, we have no official explanation as to how the Australian Department of Defence got it so wrong, why they initially denied attending, and then why they formally admitted attending in December 2023, less than 6 months after the initial denial. And that continues to be one of my drivers, is to get to the bottom and find out how they stuffed it up so badly. Was it gross incompetence, or was there some other nefarious intentional deception at play? So that continues to be a line of inquiry that I'm pushing on. So that was on the 15th of February, that document. On the around about the same time, there was another document. If I just show you this one on screen, this was kind of an updated version of the Chief of Air Force brief that I had secured for release again in May 2022. You know, the one I showed you where it said strategic narrative, UAP will likely be one of three things. Well, this is an updated version of the Chief of Air Force brief on UAP as of 12th February of this year. Now, handling note, you can see Air Marshal Robert Chipman, Chief of Air Force, to lead on the topic, but you also now have a co-lead. Professor Tanya Munro, who's the Chief Defence Scientist for the Defence Science and Technology Group, is to lead on Defence Science and Technology Group activities related to unidentified anomalous phenomena. If there's nothing to the UFO UAP topic, move along, folks, nothing to see here. Well, why is there now a broader level of engagement across the Australian Department of Defence on this topic? And it's not being said publicly, but it's clearly evident behind closed doors. You now have the Chief Defence Scientist engaged on the topic and co-leading on discussions and responses pertaining to UFO UAP. Again, I've highlighted some key points here, talking points. Again, if Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Robert Chipman gets asked questions by, say, Senator Whish-Wilson in a Senate estimates, well, here are some talking points that you can stick to. There are well-established procedures utilised by military and civilian air traffic controllers and aircrew for the management and reporting of airspace infringements, that is, the unauthorised entry of an aircraft into airspace that is either prohibited or where clearance is required, and unknown aircraft. There are also equally well-established military and civilian mechanisms for the reporting of incidents that pose risk to aviation safety. Well, I would argue that that is not the case, because Ross Coulthart, for those of you that know, that he's an investigative journalist that's been taking this topic very seriously and leading the charge in bringing out whistleblowers like David Grush in May of last year. Recently, he did an interview for News Nation with Luis Elizondo, claimed former director of ATIP in the around about a decade, a decade ago or so, 2016, 17. There was an in-person event that Ross Coulthart he presented at a Q&A event is the State Library of New South Wales in October of last year. And at that event, he received a lot of questions from those in attendance. And he was talking specifically about, in that week or the previous week, he had an F-35 pilot, an Australian F-35 pilot, sitting down with him in his living room, I think even his lounge room, talking about observations of UAP, anomalous objects that F-35 pilots, had observed in Australian airspace that they could not readily identify or reconcile. And Ross's, I won't play the clip because it's copyrighted, but I'm just relaying it to you or paraphrasing it to you. And the F-35 pilot said to, Ross said, are you prepared to report that to your higher ups, to those in the Royal Australian Air Force? And the response that Ross received from that F-35 pilot was, what do you think? Based on the responses publicly that the Chief of Air Force previously Air Marshal Mel Hupfield and now Air Marshal Robert Chipman have made, what degree of confidence did I have as a F-35 pilot that my report is going to be taken seriously? You can see from Penny Wong's response, her ignorance in that Senate estimates hearing, that stigma is alive and well. Why on earth would an F-35 pilot want to report an observation of UAP in Australian airspace if their report's not going to be taken seriously, if they're potentially going to be ridiculed and have a black dot placed against their name that could potentially jeopardize future employment opportunities or retirement opportunities? That testimony that was provided to, and I take what Ross says to be an accurate reflection of what he was told by an F-35 pilot. That's a complete contrast to what the Royal Australian Air Force and the Chief of Air Force is saying, that we have adequate reporting protocols in place. Pilots can report via occurrence reports of unusual observations or unidentified aircraft. But that is at complete odds with F-35 pilots that are sitting down with Ross Coulthard and saying completely the opposite. And that in itself, I believe, is the true national security threat. If you've got military pilots and aviators or those in the Defence Force that are observing UAP and aren't reporting it, which could be a foreign adversarial threat, or it could be something far more exotic that falls in that catch-all other bin, well, that is the national security threat. And sadly, I believe Australia is where the United States is or was 10 years ago, where it didn't have any mandatory reporting or recording mechanisms in place for its defence personnel on UAP, which it does now. It's mandatory for defence personnel in the United States to report observations of UAP. And the walls of stigma are crumbling down in the United States because of all of these efforts that have been made by the Department of Defense in the US and Congress advocating for this being a national security threat and a safety of flight issue. But unfortunately, Australia is decades behind the United States. And I do not understand why, as the closest ally to the United States, our positions on UAP could not be further apart. And it really just frustrates me to this very day. And so that kind of leads us into where we are now in August of 2024. So only a few months ago, I was able to secure for release through the US Freedom of Information Act a document that was the agenda for the Five Eyes Forum on UAP, the briefing that ARO under Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick provided to the Five Eyes member countries. That's Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. So I was able to secure for release through FOIA the agenda document for this Five Eyes Forum on UAP, which was officially called the FVEY, is the acronym for Five Eyes Inaugural UAP Caucus Working Group. And the intention of this Five Eyes UAP Caucus Working Group, it was to bring together key partners to cultivate shared awareness of allies' UAP issues. So what issues do you have, Canada, New Zealand, UK, and Australia with UAP? Detection of UAP identification, and what mitigation activities and challenges do you have, and what opportunities are there for mission-specific collaboration? Planned presentations include our own office updates, being ARO, on operations and analyses, and in bold, updates from Five Eyes partners. The intent is to develop a framework for future collaboration. And on the agenda, there was, about 90 minutes or just shy of 90 minutes, 75 minutes, Five Eyes partner updates. And who was first cab off the rank? Australia. So Australia, who hasn't investigated the topic since 1996, had no desire to collaborate with allies or partners of Australia on the UAP issue, had not received any briefings from or engaged the United States Department of Defense up until May of 2023 on UAP, and had not been privy to any of the classified information that had been shared in classified reports to Congress up until May 2023. we're asked to do a presentation on Australia's efforts. How embarrassing. What was Australia, the question I have is, what was Australia able to bring to the table? What was it able to add to the discussion when it has had absolutely no interest on this topic since 1996? Sure, it can talk about what it did in the days where it formally investigated unusual aerial sightings, but what was it able to contribute and bring to the table at this briefing? And I'd be very interested to know what our Five Eyes partners, Canada, the UK and New Zealand, were bringing to the table as well. Australia and UK and even New Zealand are very much all being very cagey on their country's interest or appetite for this topic. They haven't really revealed anything publicly on what their defence departments have been doing on this topic. So that's really an interesting insight, that you have not only Australia being asked to attend this Five Eyes UAP caucus working group meeting, which initially denied attending, but more importantly, they're now being asked to present. And what are they going to offer? What are they going to bring to the table? So again, this was reported in the Canberra Times. So I provided background information to Jamison Murphy, who had done those other two articles, one in October 2023 and one in 11th of February of this year. And in a follow-up, only, 2 months ago, June 28, Australia discussed UFO collection planning with US in secret meetings. So why is Australia being so cagey and non-transparent on this issue and its engagement with the United States and its appetite to better understand the nature and extent of UAP? And that's one of my ongoing frustrations, is trying to just get a straight answer from the Australian Department of Defence on what it's doing to take this topic seriously. Because as an Australian, I want my government to formally acknowledge that UFOs are real, because the United States, our ally, has said they are, that the UAP phenomenon is real. We want that to be acknowledged by the Australian government, Australian Department of Defence. We want the phenomenon to be investigated, and we want some form of conclusion to be reached as to what UAP, are. What's behind them? What's their intent? Because if there is this national security threat and safety of flight risk that the US has said time and time again, and that it's not an issue that's isolated to the United States, then we have some big, big problems from a national security perspective. The last two documents that I'll share with you, these were my efforts to try and secure information through the Freedom of Information Act that would shed a light on who it was in the Australian Department of Defence that maybe attended the ARO's Five Eyes inaugural UAP caucus working group meeting. And so I submitted a request. This was on the 20th of December last year, only a few days after Department of Defence said, yes, we did attend the Five Eyes Forum. I requested copies of the Australian Department of Defence produced emails, including supporting file attachments and written correspondence that relate to and support the determination made by the Australian Department of Defence that a defence representative of the Australian Embassy in Washington, D.C., attended the Five Eyes Forum on UAP, led by Director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, in May 2023. The response: I have identified one document as matching the scope or matching the description of the request. The authorised decision maker for the FOIA office decided to refuse release of the document under Section 7 of the FOIA Act. Now, what is Section 7? Section 7 provides that agencies are exempt from the operation of the FOIA Act in relation to particular types of documents. An agency is exempt from the operation of this Act in relation to the following documents. A document, being an intelligence agency document, has originated with or has been received from any of the following agencies. And I highlight the Defence Intelligence Organisation, known as the DIO, on screen, because they have a very long history of investigating the UFO topic in Australia. Prior to the Defence Intelligence Organisation, it was the Joint Intelligence Organisation, and anyone that knows their history knows that Australian nuclear scientist Harry Turner, authored an explosive minute paper for the Joint Intelligence Organization in 1971 that summarized the US's efforts on UFO investigatory efforts from Roswell up until 71. And prior to it being the Joint Intelligence Organization, it was the Joint Intelligence Bureau. All Australian government agencies are exempt from the operation of the Act in relation to intelligence agency documents. So I take that. My interpretation of that is that it was a defense representative from the Defense Intelligence Organization, the DIO, based in Washington, D.C. at the Australian Embassy, that attended the Five Eyes inaugural UAP caucus working group meeting. And wouldn't you know it, the Defense Intelligence Organization is exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. So we're never going to get any information pertaining to this, and I can say with a high degree of confidence that it was a representative of the Defense Intelligence Organization. A follow-up request that I submitted, this was on the 27th of December, a slightly different request, going for the same sort of information, but requesting it using keywords, search keywords. Same thing. I have identified one document as matching the description of the request, and again, the document was refused on the grounds that it's likely an intelligence agency document that is within the holdings of the Defense Intelligence Organization. So I know I've been talking for a very long time. Hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of a comprehensive overview as to where we've come from in October of 2021, where we are to date, the back and forth, the denials, the admissions, the lack of transparency that we've seen from the Australian government and Department of Defence on Australia's engagement and rather lack thereof on the topic to date.
Thank you, Grant. That's very interesting. Just before we dive into some of the comments and questions in the chat, I hope you can see those. I just wanted to bring to your attention this letter, because you've mentioned, and I saw it in text too, 1996, they stopped investigating. The letter that we received, is that around the right way or is it in the mirror writing? I can't see. But it was actually,
that is displaying the right way, yes.
Okay, it was dated 1994, January 94. So, and where they advised that the RAF would no longer take reports from the public and they'd pass them on to civil organisations like ours. And they also accompanied that with the updated RAF policy.
Yep.
As well. So that was 4th of January 94. And of course, I then very quickly got onto the office of the Minister for Defence and saying, basically, in a nutshell, I said, hey, wait a minute, you can't dump all that onto us. We're not getting paid for it, basically.
Yeah, right.
It's in the direction of where we can get some funding. And because in their letter, they say that, what do they say here? The number of reports made to the RAF in the past decade had declined significantly, which may indicate that organisations such as yours are better known and are meeting the community's requirements. Sure, I get that, but they sent that in 94, but in my letter to the Minister for Defence, I listed some of the earlier numbers. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can see that, of the reports that we got, which actually in about, they're already going up in 91 to 196, 92, 555. And I think it was 96 or 97, we topped out at 800 reports in 1 year.
Wow.
A little tiny group trying to cope with all this. So, yes, but I didn't get anywhere with the funding. So I just sort of tell you that. Yeah.
That's fascinating, and I think there's so the 1996 date was, I believe, when the Royal Australian Air Force and Defence had completely washed its hands of any UAS centric or UAS specific investigatory efforts. Certainly, there was in the years prior to that, saying, well, we're going to defer all reports, civilian reports, to civilian organizations like yourself and MUFON and the likes of others. So it was in the kind of that mid-90s when it all kind of just said, move along, folks, nothing to see here. We're not going to touch the topic anymore, which is very frustrating, several decades later, where everything that's been happening in the United States, we live in a very, very different time than we did in the 90s. And why, again, there's just this reluctance from Australia to step into the ring and publicly, support the efforts of the United States, because Canada has, to a degree, Canada has been a lot more open and transparent, not to the degree that, say, the US has, but at least, Canada has this Sky Project Canada initiative where it's actually due to release a report relatively soon on its efforts, preliminary investigative efforts on UAP or UFOs in a Canadian context. So why Australia, New Zealand, and the UK are so late to the party, I don't know. I don't understand it. Yeah, so most of my engagement is really just on X, formerly Twitter. My handle's just at Grant Lavac, all one word. You can find me on YouTube as well. With two little ones, I don't get to do a podcast or a live stream as much as I'd like to, but I try and share what content, namely documents that I'm able to secure for release through FOIA at least once a month, so you can see some of the research that I've done to date. And if you just search for me on YouTube, Grant Lavac, or as you mentioned, Cheryl, the Unexplained Rundown is the name of the podcast live stream. You can watch some of my content there as well. So they're the two easiest ways to find me.